going to pick up where we left off last night. Now we've got an awful lot of material to cover, so we've got to move right along. As we were in our chart last night, we were in the 3rd century, the 3rd century after Christ, and we were talking about the things that had happened. One major event that occurred at that time that had a major significance in Baptist church history and really on all things, that called a separation or non-fellowship declared. And that's the event that in the church at Rome, where a question or a dispute over church discipline arose in that church. Of course, that was indicative of other problems that were wrong in that church there. That's the same church that the Apostle Paul wrote to in the book of Romans. And the two men involved in that were two preachers, Novatian and Cornelius. And because of the liberal desire of that church, they voted to have Cornelius be their pastor. And so Novatian left the church, and those that followed him, that was the minority, but they left, and those that followed Novatian began to be known as Novatianists, simply because they were with Novatian. Now that doesn't mean that Novatian started a new denomination. He most certainly didn't. Matter of fact, they were simply contending for the faith once delivered to the saints. Those that were left there, the liberals that were left there, they went on into further heresy, and before long they were unrecognizable even as Christians, much less as Baptists. So this is in the 3rd century. We picked up the Novatianists. Now we've already picked up the Montanists. We picked them up back in the 2nd century. And the reason they were called Montanists is because of one of their leaders, Montanus. Those are Latin names, is the reason they sound like that. And the Montanists and the Novatianists, they believed and practiced the same doctrines. But now look at your map, and you can see the Mediterranean Sea there on the map, the spread of Christianity, and there you find the boot Italy. And of course there is the city of Rome. And that's where the city of Rome in Italy is where the Novatianists, we first see those that were called Novatianists, and that was in Italy, and they spread. You see, these early Baptists were truly missionary, and they didn't stay dormant. They didn't lie dormant someplace. They were intensely missionary. But then we find that in the country of Asia Minor, and especially around the province of Phrygia, is where the Montanists arose. That's where they were very strong. But now they also spread even over into Armenia, around Palestine, and even some into northern Africa, and so did the Novatianists spread. So those two groups, though they were called by those names, their enemies called them that. They didn't call themselves that. But they believed and practiced the same doctrines, and there's some evidence that they interchanged members between themselves. And in the next century, we run into another group called the Donatists. We talked about those briefly last night. They arose in northern Africa, which is on the bottom of your map here, this whole northern coast of Africa. And by this 4th century, by the 4th century, they have spread for 2,000 miles across northern Africa. Over 200 miles north to south, over 2,000 miles east and west. And so they were very dominant in northern Africa. There have been those who have tried to claim that some of these groups weren't Baptists. Well, no doubt amongst all of these groups there were heretics, those that didn't walk according to the truth. Just as amongst even independent Baptists today, you have to examine the churches, because not all of them are always sound. Things do happen. They do go into heresy, as always. But the majority of these folks, you can say with all authority, there have been some awful good men that have made some awful good studies of them, and they were Baptists by their doctrines, not necessarily their name. However, I want you to notice this. When you see this term Anabaptist, now as you see this constant line here, Anabaptist begins to be the name whereby they're recognized. And at least as far back as this 4th century, we can see, the 3rd and 4th century, that these groups began to be called Anabaptist. Now the reason they were called Anabaptist was because that they would not receive baptism from any false church. Anybody that came to them and didn't have scriptural baptism, they would baptize them. Now they didn't call themselves Anabaptists or re-baptizers. The prefix ana means re. But their enemies called them Anabaptists because as far as they were concerned, they were re-baptizing. Well, you know what we believe, that we don't re-baptize, we baptize. Amen. And so I don't think it really would be too wise for us to call ourselves Anabaptists because we're really not Anabaptists in the sense that we're re-baptizers. In the sense that we are kin spiritually, doctrinally to these folks, then yes, we are Anabaptists. And some of our folks, even in the 18th century in this country, and even in the 19th century, were still being called Anabaptists by their enemies because the doctrines and practices were so similar. And we say that they are of the same group. They are the same people. All right, so these are some of the groups that we pick up. We see down here, Paterinis. Well, this is also a group in Italy. Some of these various names. Look at Puritans, Cathari. There's again our Paterinis. Well, now Puritans and Cathari. You know what a catharsis is? It's a Greek word for pure or clean. All right, and so the Puritans. Now these Puritans are not the Puritans of the post-Reformation age. These Puritans are purely Puritans. The reason they were called Puritans and Catharists was because of their high moral standards. That they practiced a high morality. Not only were they believers of the doctrine of salvation by grace through faith, the doctrines of God's grace, but they also believed that those who name the name of Jesus ought to desist from sin and walk according to their calling. And they believed that very intensely. And so they were highly moral. Matter of fact, in some encyclopedias, if you're going to find anything out about the Montanist and the Novatianist and the Donatist and even later on the Waldenses and Albigenses and those people, do you know what you have to look under? You have to look under Manichaeanism. Now you wouldn't have known that, would you? You'd have gone probably most of your life unless you just read every word in some of those encyclopedias. Do you know why? Because they were all lumped together as being Manichaeans. Well, I won't spend much time on Mani, but in the 3rd century, this fella taught a form of Persian dualism that said that evil and good were eternal, and that evil sometimes is stronger than good, and everything that's in the earth is evil. And because these Baptists preached a high morality, they said, well, these are Manichaeans. Well, these folks were not Manichaeans. They were Baptists. And they had a proper understanding. Nothing is unclean of itself, the Bible says. But anyway, you have to really watch because did you all know that we're Kiliists? You may also find us all listed under the term Kiliist. Well, because we believe in a coming 1,000-year literal reign of Jesus Christ, but you know that there are also others that believe a 1,000-year reign, JWs and a few others, so they lump us together with them. So you got to be real careful about what you let those liberals do to our people. You have to understand. You got to be on our side because we've got a lot of enemies. Do you realize that much of the information that remains about all of these folks, or I'm going to say probably even a majority of the information that remains about these folks was written by their arch enemies. And so you can imagine if our arch enemies report about us, they're not going to be favorable unless they absolutely have to be. So you have to understand that when you begin reading some of these old works. All right. So as we move on, in this section now, we have baptismal regeneration, infant baptism appears, and then non-fellowship declared. That's the event there in the church at Rome. The next century, we have some very, very major things. As I told you last night or night before, there's a tremendously long list of Roman emperors, and we just don't have time to study them all. They're not really all worth studying. But one of the last major persecutions, here we see 303 Persecution Act. There was an emperor by the name of Galerius. The one preceded him was Diocletian, but Galerius was the last Roman emperor who passed a decree to literally obliterate Baptists from the face of the earth, and those that believe like Baptists. And so that Persecution Act was one of the most bloody of all the persecutions up until that time. And I mean literally, they were trying to commit genocide. They were trying to do the same thing that Adolf Hitler was trying to do to the Jews and the gypsies of Europe. And so they didn't accomplish it though. They failed at it, but yet many hundreds of thousands of Baptists died under that Galerian persecution. And that's what took place there. Now, we see a name up here, Constantine. See also Church and State United, several things here. So this is very, very decisive time. The world says, and the religious world says, this is the most major event, the greatest event that ever took place in church history. That's what they say. I didn't say that. That's what they say. I don't believe it was the greatest. I think for our popes, it was one of the worst. But at any rate, what happened was that the Emperor Constantine, his dad was Constantius the First, and Constantine, and he had a brother, and they were kind of sharing the kingdom, and they began to fight, and then there was another Maxentius. And so what it was a standoff between Maxentius and now Constantine in order to be sole ruler of the Roman Empire. And so Constantine has been out with his troops fighting, and they're tired, wore out, and so Maxentius is also out, and they know they're going to meet at the Milvian Bridge. And it's called the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. And sometime just before that battle, Constantine supposedly now, he is looking for a way to inspire his troops to rise to the occasion, because if he loses the battle, he's out as emperor. If he wins, he's in. I mean, so it is a major, major deal to him. And it was also to Maxentius. But what supposedly happens is we find out that Constantine is quite a politician, because he had been raised, now keep this in mind, he was a worshiper of the Persian sun god Mithras. That was the Persian sun god. Now, even though the sun god was called different things in different countries, as we already went over that the first night, Mithras, the Persian sun god, is the one that Constantine was a worshiper of, and never did renounce that until just before he died. And the only way he renounced it is because he was baptized then, and I guess you could call that a renunciation of it. But anyway, Constantine says, boys, he got up and he says, I've had me a dream. I saw me a vision. And I looked off in yon sky, and there I saw a flaming sword. And it said, in hoc vinces. In hoc signus vinces. That's it. In this sign conquer. Those Latin words, of course. I didn't break into a tongue here for you, but I had to interpret that. Anyway, so here we have, and this is all, and most, the average historian, he just reports this, doesn't say much about it. Well, you and I know know that if he saw a flaming sword in the sky with words like that, he'd probably been smoking something. Or else somebody hit him in the head or something. We know he didn't see any such thing as that.
That's right.
Now, you know what I believe he did? I believe he imagined that because he had been raised favorable towards Christianity. He wasn't a rank hater of Christians. But I have an idea that the only Christianity that Constantine was ever really exposed to was that liberal Christianity that we saw what was left at the Church of Rome after Novatian left it. I mean, that's just like now. You know, we've got a president and vice president taking over that are going to be, that they're both Southern Baptists. But, you know, according to things that they say and do, we know that they're not Baptists. I mean, you know, what kind of Baptists are they? What kind of Baptists are they exposed to? Well, it's the same way. It's been the same way all through history. All right, so anyway, Constantine orders that sign be painted on the shields of his troops, that flaming sword and the sign, the words in this sign, conquer. And then they had the banners made, and so this was now their charge sign. And so they meet Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, and they soundly defeat him. Constantine is proclaimed sole emperor of the Roman Empire, and the first thing that he did was to declare the Edict of Toleration in 311, or AD 311. And that edict, is that just an order from an official order from the emperor, the Edict of Toleration. For the first time, Christianity was tolerated legally. And now, so that was better in one sense. But the next thing that he does in 313 is he now, because of his allegiance to Christianity, or at least the kind of Christianity that he was exposed to, and because he used Christianity to really see himself as emperor and win his battles, he declares the Christian religion not only to be the legal religion, but to be the religion of Rome. And he declared paganism to be illegal. Now, you can imagine that caused quite a stir in the Roman Empire, because the pagans had done nothing but hate and resent the presence of the Christians ever since they'd been there. I mean, for 300 years. And now, all of a sudden, the emperor has declared, you're no longer allowed to be pagans, now everybody has got to be a Christian. Well, to show you how much of a Christian Constantine was, or wasn't, as it turns out, he says he's going to force everybody to be Christian because he's going to make them all be baptized. And in order to baptize even his troops, he had the so-called priests, and see, immediately, if they were pagan priests, they had to become Christian priests. Same game, different deal. Or it's a different name, you see. And they got out in the river with their brooms, and as the troops would ride by on their horses, they would recite holy words and throw water on them. And that's how they made them all Christians. By exposing them to water under religious conditions. I guess that would be the way we could describe that. But now, you know, Constantine didn't do the same for himself, because realizing what type of man that he was, and realizing that being emperor of Rome, he was going to do some more sinning. Before he died, he had a long time before he was going to die. He wasn't planning on dying real soon. He was going to enjoy the fruits of his labor. And so he didn't have himself baptized, because according to his pagan belief, that baptism washed his sins away, but didn't know what he'd do about his sins after he was baptized. And so he determined that he would not be baptized until just before he died. And sure enough, right when he was on his deathbed, he had the pagan Christian priests come, and they sprinkled water on him and said holy words to him just before he died. Now, he was on his deathbed. And so that's the story of Constantine. Now, you can find that from history, good history books. You can find it from encyclopedias. It's the same. That is the history, or brief history, of Constantine and what he did. Now, what he did right here, he did the same thing that Nimrod did at the Tower of Babel. Now, so you see, Nimrod, back in 2400 BC, Nimrod established church and state together, working together, tied in together, and that's been the way of paganism. It always has been, from that time on. And we saw it in all of the heathen nations all along, and now we see it again in the Roman Empire. Now, of course, paganism was there, but now what they have really done is they have taken every remnant of Christianity and corrupted it with paganism, only calling it Christianity, and now joined it with the state. That it is a part, it is a vital part of the Roman Empire. Remember, our image had two legs of iron. I contend that one of those legs was political Rome, and the other leg was religious Rome. Now, I don't know if you can do any better than that. That's what I contend. The Lord's churches were persecuted first by Jews up till 70 AD. After that, they were persecuted by pagans. Now, they're going to be persecuted by those who travel under the same name as they do, the name of Jesus Christ. And didn't Jesus warn his disciples? He said, the time will come when they'll kill you and think they do God a service. Amen. And most certainly that's exactly what they did. All right. So, church and state united. All right, so now you see the word hierarchy. Well, a hierarchy is a religious control group. And so that is exactly what is formed. Now, who became the head of the Roman Catholic Church? Roman for the Roman Empire. The word Catholic simply means universal or general. Really, that word Catholic can be used, if not even in connection with Roman Catholicism, but put together the Roman Catholic Church. In other words, Rome ruled the world. So the doctrine of Roman Catholicism, as was enlarged by Augustine in his City of God, was that the Catholic Church is the universal, visible Church of God. Not universal, invisible, what the Protestants teach today, but the universal, visible Church of God. And the vicar, later on the Pope becomes the vicar, V-I-C-A-R, or the literal representative, if not just a notch above, Jesus Christ on the earth. Now, who begins to be the head of the Roman Catholic Church? Well, according to politics and according to pagan religion, there was only one logical one that could be the head of the Holy Roman Catholic Church, and that is the Roman Emperor. Now, if I use the terms Pontifex Maximus, how many know who I'm talking about? Pontifex Maximus. Raise your hand. You know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about? You think I'm talking about the Pope, don't you? I'm not. I'm talking about the Emperor of Rome. That's the term for the Emperor of Rome. But it also is the term for the Pope at Rome. Pontifex Maximus, Supreme Pontiff. Now, you know what a pontoon is. Army engineers go in and they build pontoon bridges. Well, why do they call them pontoon? Do you know what it means? It's a bridge. So how does that have anything to do with Pope? It has a lot to do with Pope. It has a lot to do with the Roman Emperor. Because you see, the pagan Roman Emperor was seen to be the bridge to the gods. He was the supreme representative and the access to the gods of Rome. And they have taken that same title and tagged the Roman Pope to be Pontifex Maximus, the bridge to God. Well, what do the Catholics do with the Pope? Don't they exalt him to be at least next to a God on earth? Nobody lives like he does. Nobody travels like he does. Well, let's see here. While we're on the Pope, let's on Constantine that now. Constantine was not called Papa. That term Pope came later. Matter of fact, probably Gregory the Great, who was up here at 590 to 604, he was probably the first one to ever be called Papa or Pope. But the office was the same back here with Constantine. He's the supreme, he's the pagan priest, Catholic Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. Now look on the illustrator, the pictures that I've given you there on that handout. On the upper left there, you see the Pope in that chair. But now notice there are men who are carrying him. Did you see that? In that throne is exactly what he's riding in. There's no king, there's no monarch in all the world that travels like that. There may have been a few in times past, but there are none today. As a matter of fact, the poor Queen of England, the poor things will have to start paying taxes. I mean, I'm about to break my heart. $100 million a year, she's going to have to pay taxes. Well, it's about time. But anyway, this fellow doesn't pay them. And this is the Pope. Now notice that he's sitting in that throne, and what a throne that is, but he is being carried on the shoulders of those men. Does this come from the Bible? Do we know of anything in the Bible that would justify any human being being adored like that? Well, no, certainly not. There's not one thing. There's not even anything that even smells like that in the Bible. I mean, our Lord Jesus Christ, when he came into Jerusalem riding on a donkey, I mean, he didn't come in like that. He is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Amen. And he is our great high priest. But here you have this man riding like that. Well, where does this idea of procession come from? Well, it's an integral part of pagan religion. And so it's just everything from paganism has not been thrown out. They're simply taking all the pagan things and putting Christian names to them. For example, the pagans had all those gods, the Roman pagans, the Greek gods. They had all those statues, Zeus and Mars and all those temples. Well, all of a sudden overnight, they didn't tear those temples down. They just took the names off of them and put Christian names on them. They took those statues and put robes on them and called them St. Paul and St. Peter and St. this and St. that and St. this. But they kept all of their statues. They kept everything that they had. They just put so-called Christian names to it. Now Constantine did some things. If you ever witnessed to a Jehovah's Witness or an Armstrongite, they'll tell you that the only reason that we that we have the Sunday Sabbath is because of Constantine. That's what they'll tell you. Anybody ever had one of them tell you that? If you've ever dealt with them, they'll tell you that. There is a semblance of, there's just a smell of a correctness there with what they've said. Constantine did declare the Sabbath, Sunday, to be the Sabbath of the Roman Empire. But now the reason that he did that, he didn't pull that out of his hat. The reason he did that is because all Christians had been observing the Sunday Sabbath ever since Jesus Christ had declared the Sunday Sabbath, and with the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So he just simply took a practice and declared it to be law. And so we do not celebrate Sunday because of Constantine. Now Constantine did several things like that. Now we may as well just do this while we're right here. We'll have to come back to that. Do you know that I told you that Constantine was a worshiper of the Persian sun god Mithras? Well, now, do you think that he left all of that out of the Catholic religion? Well, no, he didn't. And you look at the bottom picture on the bottom left side here. Now this is a real picture. Now if you want to see this, we're getting close to Christmas time, and on December the 24th, the highest holy day of the Roman Catholic Church is Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. Now that's their high holy day, Christ Mass, and that's their biggie of the whole year. That's why we don't do much about Christmas, because it is a pagan thing. Amen. And it is a Catholic thing. But if you want to see this scene right here, you turn your television on at about midnight, December the 24th, and they'll be showing you, the world will be televising this. Won't be anything else on television but that, because they'll be showing this high holy Christ Mass from the Vatican in Rome. You just can't get no higher than this, and you'll see this is real. Now you look at those awesome columns there, those serpentine columns. They look like snakes coiled around there. Well, they are. That's all right. I don't mind that. They belong there. I'm sure they do. But you look at the tops of those columns. Now, this picture was made for us. If you go to the very top of those front columns, you see a white arrow, and you see a little figure there. It kind of almost looks like a happy face with little things sticking out there. What that's for is showing you that right there at the tops of those columns is a sign, is a figure of the sun. And if you go back into that little alcove, that cul-de-sac over there, bottom to the left, down a little bit and to the left, you see a huge sunburst right over there. Well, why is all that there? I'll tell you why. It's honoring the sun god. Is exactly who it is. Mithras, the Persian sun god. It all got into there. And you see down below, look at those guys in those white robes. Can you see that? Can you make all that out? Is it clear enough to you? I mean, this is a huge monstrosity of a building. I think the building itself is ungodly. I don't think there's anything beautiful about it. I think it's ungodly. I don't think any child of God ought to be ooh and ah over such a thing. But you ought to know better than that. This thing is built pagan, and this is out of the mystery of Babylon the Great. We ought not to have any appreciation of beauty and art here. There isn't any. Just blood and heresy and just awful things. But you look at all those men in white there. Oh, they don't look like a bunch of Ku Klux Klan men, don't they? I mean, stand around. Where do you find anything like that in the Bible? Well, that's what they're doing. They're having mass, and people stand around and looking and gawking at that, and just like it's something real holy. Well, that's the most pagan, heathenistic thing that you could possibly imagine. All right. So that's something of the papacy. Now, when you talk about the papacy, we're talking about the rule of the popes. And from Constantine on to the present day, there have been so many popes you couldn't imagine how many popes there have been. As a matter of fact, the Catholic Church would love for us to forget about a bunch of them. They'd love for us to forget about John the 12th. There's been 3 or 4 John the 12s to make us forget about the real John the 12th. And there have been female popes. There was a Pope Joan up here about in the 12th century here. There was a female pope who had a baby. Anyway, there have been times when there have been 2 and 3 popes at the same time. On your map, the spread of Christianity, if you'll go back to southern France there, you find Marseille on that's the French Riviera, that southern coast there. And then there's Arles there. There was a church council held there, a Catholic church council. But right to the right of Arles, now you'd have to write this in, but there's a place, Avignon, Avignon, just right next to Arles there. And at one time there was a papacy there as well as one in Rome. And do you know that one pope, they got to fussing and fighting. They were so wicked. The place that housed the Pope was nothing more than a brothel. And I mean, this is just a matter of history. It's not something I'm revealing, secret. It's a matter of history. But do you know that there was so much bloodshed and bloodthirstiness amongst those popes that one pope succeeded another that had died, and he hated him so much that he had him dug up and cursed him, and a dead body, corrupted dead body, and then had his body hacked in pieces and threw it in the river. Didn't let him have a burial. I mean, such ungodly stuff as that, and yet people call these the vicar of Christ on earth. And so, just a study of the history and the lives of the popes would just astound you, shock you. All right, let's go back to our illustration now, or to our pictures, and look at the top right. And what I want you to see here, now Now this is a relief. This is a picture of a carved relief from paganism. But you look at the second figure, the one on the left has like angel's wings, and then the one right there, look what he has on his head. Can you tell what he's dressed up in? He's in a fish costume. It'd be a good Halloween costume, wouldn't it? Right. Well, you know what he is? He's the high priest of Dagon, the fish god. Now, if you remember in Bible history, in the book of Judges, or book of Samuel rather, down on the Philistine coast, that the coast of Israel that there was a god named Dagon, and those worshipers of Dagon, the Philistines, they stole the Ark of the Covenant. Remember that? And they put the Ark of the Covenant right next to Dagon, the fish god, half fish and half man. Well, this Dagon came from ancient Babylon, but they liked him there in the Philistine coast there. And anyway, Dagon, the fish god, fell over that night. Never had fallen over before. Well, they tried it for another night. Next time, old Dagon, the fish god, was broke into all pieces, and they knew they had something too hot to handle. They had the Ark of God's Covenant, the glory of God, and that old idol couldn't stand next to the glory of God. But this is who this fellow represents here, is Dagon, the fish god. Now, the reason I got him here is because now I want you to go back and look at that fellow sitting in the big chair. And then I want you to see what he's got on his head. Now, did you ever wonder where in the world the Pope's got that hat from? That's called a mitre. Did you ever wonder where they got that thing from and what in the world that design? Can you imagine where that design would come from? I can't imagine something. They said, well, I've even had Baptist preachers even tell me early on, well, I think they've got that from the Old Testament, from the priest of the Old Testament. What they need to do is read the Old Testament. Amen. Because you read the Old Testament, you come to find out that the priest of the Old Testament, the high priest, didn't wear something like that. He wore like a turban, a bonnet. It was called a bonnet. That's what it was. That was the headdress. The mitre, it was like that, just a bonnet, round bonnet. Wasn't anything near like that. And so then, look at that. Look at the way that thing is made. See that wide openness up there. Isn't that weird looking? You really stop and think, a grown man wearing something like that. But I said, do you see any similarity between that and the fellow next to him? And the next picture over there? Well, you should, because that's exactly what that is. You look at that on his head, and you look at the robe he's wearing, that's exactly Dagon the fish god. You say, well, that doesn't have anything to do with Catholicism, is that right? You think fish doesn't have a lot to do with Catholicism? Sure it does. Do you know that, I don't know whether they're doing it now or not, but I know all the rest of the world they do. You know the Catholics have to eat fish on Friday, they can't eat meat. Where is that in the Bible? It's not in the Bible. The Bible says the time will come when they'll command you to abstain from meat. Abstain from marriage. See, the Bible said that would happen. But nowhere in the Bible does it say you got to eat fish on Friday. Right. Or does it say you got to eat fish any other day of the week? Now, I'm not against eating fish. I love eating fish. And I'll eat it on Friday if I want to. And I'll eat it on Thursday if I want to. But if I want to eat me a hamburger on Friday, I'm going to eat me a hamburger. Right. If I've got one to eat. But where did all this come from? I'll tell you where it comes from. It comes from this pagan worship of Dagon, the fish god. And then there's another reason. There's another reason Catholics had to eat fish on Friday. Because the Pope's on the fish markets. You think I'm kidding? That's exactly the truth. All right, let's move on. We really need to move on here. I think I've covered all the points here. If I missed something, let me know. In the 5th century, Popery officially established Leo II. And we'll talk about him. That's about 451, somewhere thereabout. It was established with Constantine, but now things are developing out. You don't have, later on, you're not going to have any Roman emperor to automatically put there. And so there's got to be a succession of others. All right. You have several things here. Mariolatry, infant baptism established by law. We've already mentioned these in Spain and France there. All right. So, in this century, things really began to take shape. As far as doctrine-wise, I didn't even mention this. There's so many things to cover. There was a council began to be held back here after Constantine declared Christianity to be the religion of Rome. It was the Council of Nicaea. And that was the first major one. There was one before that, the Council of Ars, but the first major council, and Constantine addressed that council of all of these bishops that came in. But here's what you got to know about that. These bishops, well, they're not bishops like bishops are in the Catholic Church today. The New Testament term bishop means pastor. And that's all it did mean. That's all it does mean. As far as being a bishop over churches and all that kind of stuff, it just doesn't mean that. But these councils began to be called, and they did discuss some things there. That Council of Nicaea lasted several years. They discussed Arianism. That is, Arianism is where the JWs get their doctrine today, denying the Trinity. And so that heresy was there, and the majority put that heresy down, but within about 60 more years they'd already all of them accepted that Arian heresy. But anyway, they also discussed the Donatists in northern Africa, what they were going to do about the Donatist problem. And so they determined to do away with them. And so persecutions increased against the Donatists in northern Africa. All right, but now there's a whole list of the councils. If you want to make a study of the Catholic councils, so-called ecumenical, empire-wide councils, and they still have them today. For example, we'll have one up here at the Council of Ephesus that we'll talk about here. The Council of Valencia, the Lateran Council, the Council of Constance, the Council of Trent. And at all of these councils, things happened that really made it difficult, extremely difficult, upon our Baptist forefathers. And for example, at the Council of Ephesus, about 432. Now, you remember Ephesus is where Paul wrote to the church at Ephesus, and he stayed with them for 3 years, teaching night and day, as recorded in the 20th chapter of the book of Acts. But it was there at Ephesus, something else was very popular, and that was the worship of Diana of the Ephesians. And so this female goddess of the Ephesians, of the pagan Ephesians that was worshipped there at Ephesus, what happened to her in this transformation of paganism to Catholicism? Well, we didn't lose her. As a matter of fact, don't you think it's rather strange that at about 432 at the Council of Ephesus, Mariolatry, now that's the worship of Mary, began to be practiced. Now, at the Council of Chalcedon, at about 450 there, it was actually officially declared, but it really was put forth at the Council of Ephesus. Well, I don't think it was coincidental that it was at the Council of Ephesus that they determined that they were going to inaugurate or to begin to practice officially the worship of Mary as the Mother of God. They say, here's how they reasoned. They said Mary was the mother of Jesus. Jesus is God. Therefore, Mary was the mother of God. Wrong. Amen. God does not have a mother. Jesus is God. Mary was the mother of Jesus, the man. But beyond that, there's no more similarity. Mary was a sinner, saved by the grace of God, who did not remain a virgin. You know, later on they began to declare the perpetual virginity of Mary, saying she never did cease to be a virgin. But the Bible plainly says that Jesus had half brothers and half sisters. Right. And so they lied about that, but people accept those lies. But now what I want you to see is that Mary, well now you know, since in the 1950s, they began to teach, the Pope began to declare at one of the papal decrees that Mary not only she remained a perpetual virgin, but she didn't even die. She ascended into heaven. And that only began, if we're talking about in the middle 1950s, that became doctrine. And is it Paraguay, brother, that they changed the name of the capital to Asuncion? And that is exactly what that word means. Asuncion means ascension. And that is in honor of the ascension of Mary. Now they don't even believe that Mary died, that she just ascended into heaven. And so, I mean, they have really taken that thing to the nth degree, but all they have done was they changed Diana of the Ephesians into Mary, the mother of Jesus. She's not Mary, the mother of Jesus. They just say she is. They put a robe on her. Spiritually, if you were to take that robe off of that, you see the statue of Mary, and she's standing there like that, isn't she? When you see a full statue of Mary, she's standing there with her hands out. Isn't that right? She's got a robe on. Well, I'm not trying to be lewd here, but spiritually, if you take that robe off, do you know who you'd see? Look at the bottom right hand of your paper here. That's who you'd see, because that's who that statue really is. This is Diana of the Ephesians. Brother, you got one of those? Okay. Diana of the Ephesians. Now look at her. You go from the ground up. She's got that robe. You see how her hands are. How like the majority of the statues that you see of Mary. All of these Babylonian symbols here. You see the calves around her body, around her calves, those calves. That's rather unique, and around her calves are calves. Horn calves sitting there. And you see snakes, you see lions, you see all of these things, and then she is multi-breasted, which is a weird goddess of fertility. And then you see all the rest of her, and there's her head and with the hair, but dig that crazy hat. You see that hat on her head? Well, folks, that's not really a hat. You know what that is? That's the Tower of Babel. You look at it. That is the Tower of Babel, and this is an actual drawing of the original statue of Diana of the Ephesians. Well, and it was right there at Ephesus where they declared Mariolatry to be the religion of the Roman Catholic Church, and that is the same place where it was the center of Diana worship. All right, I thought you needed to see that. Now, in this century, infant baptism was established by law. You say, well, what did that do to Baptists? I'll tell you what it did. It caused the blood of Baptists to be shed in the millions of gallons. That's exactly what it did. Because of the Roman Empire, it was declared that every child born into the Roman Empire had to be baptized by the Roman Catholic Church. Now, you know what us good, respectful Baptists, what we would say? You're not going to baptize our baby.
That's right.
You're not going to baptize my baby. We don't believe your baptism can do anything. And do you know that's what they were accused of?
That's right.
They were accused of denying that baptism saves you. They were accused of denying that the Pope and the Catholic Church had a right to tell us what to do.
Amen.
They were accused of believing that the Bible was the Word of God and the only rule of faith and practice. They were accused of believing that they had a right to worship God according to the Word of God. They were accused of believing that the priest did not have the power to change the bread and wine into the body and blood of Jesus Christ. They were accused of believing that the Mass did not accomplish anything and was heathen. Does that sound like good folk to you?
Amen.
They were guilty of all they were accused of in those instances, and we are guilty of the same thing. Do you know? Now, St. Joseph Hospital here in Lexington has gotten out of the baby birthing business. But do you know that every baby ever born in St. Joseph Hospital, up until they stopped it, every baby born there was baptized into the Roman Catholic Church? My brother was born there. My mother didn't know it, nobody else knew it, but I'll guarantee you he was sprinkled into the Roman Catholic Church. I'll guarantee he was. Every baby ever baptized, every birth ever born in a Catholic hospital, somehow or another, they get their water or something on it, or that baby. Somehow. I've seen the instructions that the nuns have. If the doctors, if a baby's going to die, they're trying to birth the baby, and the baby's going to die. Before that baby dies, they have to somehow get water or some kind of a liquid onto that baby, even if they have to go up into the womb and do that. And they do it. If it's not water, they can get any other kind of fluid and use your imagination on that. And that's what extreme unction is. And every baby, if its doctor's not a Catholic, then it's got to be a nurse. If it's not a nurse, it's got to be an aide, or it's got to be a maintenance person. Whoever, if it's a Catholic, that baby has to have water on it. And they call that baptism. And any baby born into a Catholic hospital, most certainly. Now, we know that they don't bother. That water, whatever they get on them, doesn't bother. But if you know that's going on, then you become party to it, and that is an occasion of departing from the faith. It most certainly is. And so they come and they say, we're going to, of course in those days they didn't have hospitals. Babies were all born at home. And so here comes a local priest, says, I've come to baptize your baby. You say, oh no, we can't do that. No, and then you tell the reasons why. You know what happens? Then all of you are killed. Everything you've got is confiscated, tortured, and everything else. And that began to happen. So that was an extremely significant thing occurring on the Baptist there. As we move into the next century, the indulgences started. Now, it became law later on from there. Purgatory, saint and image worship. These centuries. Now look at this piece right here. Dark Ages. Now from the 5th century all the way up here to the 17th century. Do you know history is being rewritten today? People want to go back and rewrite history for their minority group. They want to suit their minority group. They want to make history say things that it never has said. Now you know you really can't rewrite history, but they're doing it. So our textbooks are being changed. Our school textbooks are being changed. And you know what else they're being changed with? They're no longer calling this age the Dark Ages. They're calling it lower and upper Middle Ages. They're not calling it Dark Ages. These old brethren knew what they were talking about. These old historians knew exactly what they were talking about. The reason they called them Dark Ages is because they were Dark Ages. And the reason they were Dark Ages is because from this time on, you begin to see infant baptism established by law. You begin to see popery officially established. You see the scourge of Catholicism over Middle-Age Europe, and the ignorance and the persecution and the Inquisition and the martyrdoms caused by the Roman Catholic Church, and then you see why it's called the Dark Ages. And they remained in ignorance and peasants and poverty and all of that. But the Catholic Church did not remain in poverty, because they began to rip off the country, the nations. Now, as we see these centuries coming on us, what's happening to the Roman Empire? The year 476 is significant. That's the end, the official end of the political Roman Empire. 476 AD, from 190 BC to 476 AD. Now that's when the Roman Empire allegedly ceased to exist as a political world power. It really didn't, but that's when they say that it did. What had happened here, back in this century and this century, later on in this the 4th century, then the 5th century, the groups of Vandals, the Huns, the Goths, Visigoths, and Ostrogoths, the Lombards, they all began moving all over Europe. You need to get your map out now. The spread of Christianity. They began to move. They began the nomadic tribes. They began to move. The Germanic tribes. And they moved all over Europe and Asia. And they began to come in and to attack the Roman Empire. They began to sack the cities of the Roman Empire. And even began to sack the city of Rome itself. We know the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, how their armies grew weak for lack of discipline and all that. But look at your map, and you find the Black Sea, which is right north of Asia Minor and Turkey, and then go up north of that, and then all back in this mountainous range, and all you come all the way over to Asia, Mongolia, and the hordes of the Huns came from the east on horseback. And they ripped and sacked and ransacked, and they were barbarians of the highest kind, or the lowest kind. And you remember Attila the Hun. He's still talked of today. A brutal, wild man was he, and boy did they strike fear in the hearts of everybody they came in contact with. Well, this Leo, just about 450 to 470, somewhere in there. The exact date escapes me right now, but Attila the Hun and all of his troops were supposedly ready to run into the city of Rome, and Leo goes out with his cross, and he somehow talks Attila the Hun out of sacking Rome, and so Leo II becomes the great deliverer of the city of Rome. But so the Huns, they back up and go back into northern Italy, and they get the bubonic plague, and they all die. But then there are others, and as you look at your map, you know where Gaul is. But go on up, and you find where Germany presently is, the Saxons. You find that these Germanic tribes, and from up in this area come the Vandals. They were barbarians. That's where we get our word vandalism, because of the wild, destructive things. And then the Goths, and the ones who went to the east were called Ostrogoths, and the ones who went to the west, to Spain and all over, they were called Visigoths. And a little later on, the Lombards moved into Italy. Well, things are moving. We've got all these tribes and these warring tribes, but all of these people are pagan. Now, like it or not, about everything connected with Christmas, the celebration of Christmas, I mean the wreaths and the trees and the mistletoe and the Yule log and all of that, those Santa Claus and all of that, they came from Northern European or Germanic heathenism. Every one of those things were heathen practices that came from there. And that is exactly how all of that got infiltrated into Catholicism and became that practice. And that's where it all came from. But politically, what's happening is that the Roman Empire doesn't have its strength, or seemingly it doesn't. But the Roman Catholic Church has got more strength than ever. So all of that power has shifted from, seemingly the political power, has shifted to spiritual or religious power. Constantine did another thing. He liked the East more than the West. Look over in your map and find the Black Sea, and come just to the eastern or the western portion of the Black Sea on the south side, and find Constantinople. You see Constantinople there? On the northern coast of Turkey, the southern coast of the Black Sea, there's Constantinople. And that city is in pretty good sized letters there. So Constantinople was renamed, or it was named for the old Byzantium. And the reason it was named Constantinople is because Constantine moved the seat of the Roman Empire over to Constantinople. And so he moved the Roman Empire and the Roman Church and all that, everything, all the government, moved it over to Constantinople. Now when he did this, he infuriated the Roman senators left in Rome, the Western Church. And so as he moves over to Constantinople, then later on he dies, there's always a major rift between the eastern part and the western part of the church. But folks, that Roman Senate was left in Rome. Even though they're on the surface, they're Christians, they're called Christians, they're left there and they're still pagans. What do you think happened to the Roman Senate? Did you ever hear of the College of Cardinals in Rome? Where in the Bible is that justified? There's no justification for a college of cardinals. Cardinals are birds and they ought to fly. But there's nothing like that in the Bible. A ruling group, the College of Cardinals. Well, the College of Cardinals today are the former Roman Senate, and that's all done just to appease everybody. But anyway, all of this time, the Roman Catholic Church is picking up all of these paganistic practices because each one of these tribes, little by little, are being Catholicized. Not Christianized, but Catholicized. They're being talked into Catholicism. And why would those chiefs, Alaric, that Vandal chief, why would he, great chief that he was, why would he want to pick up Catholicism? Because he thought he was going to make some money out of it, get some more power. That was the appeal. And so little by little, the Roman Catholic Church begins to bring in all of these tribes and convert them to Catholicism. They pick up their paganism, but they also pick up their protection. And you see, by the doctrine of Roman Catholicism, if Roman Catholicism is the religion of the world, God's religion of the world, then every king and every law officer is bound to perpetuate and defend the Catholic Church. And so she is perpetuating her. You know what she's doing? She's getting her a beast and getting on it. She's riding it. That's exactly what she's doing. You know what that is from Revelation 17 and 18. Now there's a world kingdom, a strong kingdom that is developing of just about this time. And it's called the Frankish kingdom. We find Alaric was one of the first, and then the Clovis, the Merovingian, and then there was Pepin the Short. We had a lot of them. We got Pepin the Short, Charles the Bald, Charles the Fat. I've got a lot of fun names there. But Pepin the Short, and then he has a son named Charles Martel, and he has another son called Charles the Great. We'll get back to him in just a moment. But my point is that even though it looks like the Roman Empire is down, is dead, it's not really dead. It's moving, but it's moving in a different direction with different names. But the control of it is coming right straight from the Pope, from the papacy of the Roman Catholic Church. What does this mean to our Baptist brethren all this time? Well, number one, the majority of them are peasants anyway. And number two, not only do they have the priests hunting them down, now they've got the law, now they've got the kings hunting them down. Now we have some more developments here. In this, we'll talk about these doctrines later. In this century, about the last of this century, there is a fellow by the name of Muhammad that fits into our picture. Now he's an Arab born in Medina. He's born in Mecca and buried in Medina. That's how it is. In Saudi Arabia, look back at your map and find Saudi Arabia. At the very bottom right-hand corner of your map. Now this is a little known fact. Not many people know about this. Just about 600, AD 600 is the time of Muhammad. It's kind of interesting. About 600 BC was the time of Buddha. But about 600, AD 600 is Muhammad. But now folks, Muhammad was a real man. He was an Arab. He was an illiterate sheep herder. Nothing wrong with a sheep herder. I guess you need sheep herders. But it was Muhammad. It's Muhammad who has been elevated to a position of a god now. And what happened though was this. The Arabs were all pagans. All right. The Pope at Rome has got to do something about the situation in Jerusalem. They've got to have Jerusalem. Why? Because Jerusalem is the holy city for the Catholic Christians. It's not a holy city for us. We don't hold anything holy about that city. It's a place where the Lord was, but there's nothing there now that holds anything for us. We don't need any material things like that. But you see now the Roman Catholics are different. That's right. It started off that city was a holy place. Do you know Constantine's mother, Helena, went to Jerusalem while he was alive. And you know what she started doing? She started selling relics. Splinters off of the cross. Drops of Jesus' sweat. Threads off of his robe. Earwax. And other things. Toenail clippings. I mean, people bought this stuff, and they still do it. There have been enough splinters sold off of the cross of Christ to build the world. There have been enough threads sold off of the robe that Jesus wore to cover the world. And that's been going on for a long time, and it wasn't too awful long after that they discovered the place where Jesus was crucified. And that's right in the middle of town. Well, we know better than that. He was crucified at Golgotha, which is outside of town, outside the camp. And if you ever go to the Holy Land, you know there will be two places where Jesus was crucified. The Catholics have got one, the inside, and we know that the one's outside there on Gordon's Calvary, the Golgotha. I've never been there, but I've heard about it. Well, anyway, the Catholics have got to have Jerusalem. But the problem is that the Arabs are there and they're having troubles with it. And so they want to do something. They want to get control of Jerusalem, and they also want to punish the eastern half of the Catholic Church. And so how are they going to do this? They got to stir up the Arabs. They've got to control the pagan Arabs. How are they going to get to them? They have to devise something for them. And so they devise a religion. Do you know that the Catholic Church has a definite Mass for the Muslims? Did you know that? They have one right now. A definite Mass for the Muslims to celebrate. There was a woman named Khadijah who was a rich widow who was a dyed-in-the-wool Catholic. When she was ready to retire, she gave her inheritance to the Catholic Church. She retired to a convent, but she's Arabic. And the Pope sends her by special order to find a likely man, a dynamic, charismatic type individual, and she finds Muhammad. And do you know that Muhammad now, under the leadership of his wife Khadijah, they marry. He's illiterate. But they go and sit in classes studying Augustine's theology. And little by little they develop what becomes known as the Koran. Now, Muhammad couldn't have written it. He was illiterate. And do you know that the Koran reveres Mary? I've got one in my office if you want to look at it. It's amazing. I doubt that most Muslims ever read the Koran. It's really dull bunch of reading. Just like most Mormons haven't read the Book of Mormon. If they ever read it, they'd get their eyes open. But anyway, Mohammedanism was a religion that was contrived by the Roman Catholic Church in order to take over the Arabs and to control Jerusalem and to whip the eastern part of the church that was resisting the rule of the Pope. But it got away from it. Because as soon as that religion was developed, it had to be something that would suit the personality of the Arabs. And that was a warring, bloody religion. They had their levels of heavens and all of that. All of a sudden, that religion took off. And by the year 732, do you know that Mohammedanism had already covered all over Turkey, Asia Minor, Armenia, all over Syria, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia. It had swept all the way across northern Africa. It had come across the rock at Gibraltar, come into southern Spain, and had swept up, covered Spain, crossed the Pyrenees Mountains, moved north, and moving all the way into Gaul and into France. Until the year 732, Charles Martel, in the son of Pepin the Short, he's a mayor of the palace, not exactly a king, but he leads an army, and you find Gaul and look just north of the letter G and A, between the letters G and A, and find the town of Tours, T-O-U-R-S. In the year 732, at Tours, Charles Martel withstood the onslaught of the Muslims, and whether it was that major of a deal or not, there's some debate on it. But at any rate, according to standard history books, that stopped the spread of the Muslims into northern Europe, and they retreated back across the Pyrenees into southern Spain. You go to southern Spain today, and you find as much Muslim activity there as you find in northern Africa. They've got the pirouettes, the towers, and prayer towers, and all of that because Muslims had spread across. Now, I can't prove much about what the Muslims did to our Baptist brethren, but I do know that they did persecute them greatly. All right, so they had a lot of troubles out of that. So what we're setting now is the world scene, and we're going to lead up to right here, the year 800 AD. Now, I know I'm covering this thing fast, but I need to. Charles Martel's son, called Charles the Great, or you might know him better as Charlemagne. In the year, on December the 25th, Christmas Day, Charlemagne, who is the king of the Frankish Empire, which had developed out of that Merovingian, and now from Charlemagne it will be called the Carolingian line, developed into that. But this Frankish Empire covered all of France, part of Spain, all of Germany, the Netherlands. It was a great, strong empire. And so on December the 25th of 800, AD 800, on Christmas Day, Charlemagne goes to celebrate Christ's Mass with the Pope, Leo III. As Charlemagne is down, getting blessed by the Pope, he's king of the Franks. He's a warrior. He's a dangerous man, a powerful man. As he stands up, the Pope put a crown on his head. And he said, "Hail, Caesar Augustus, King of the Holy Roman Empire." Marvelous. Now you know that you didn't hear much about that in history when you was at school. You heard about Charlemagne, but the thing about the Holy Roman Empire was kind of just dusted aside. It might have been mentioned, but it was laid aside. Number one, they probably didn't tell you much about it because they didn't know much about it. But the truth is, that was of greater significance than anything that had happened for years since Constantine. Because now all of these kingdoms, every one of them, and those that were not into the fold of Catholicism, were going to be brought into the fold by the sword of Charlemagne. Protector of the Holy Roman Catholic Church, defender of the faith, that's what he's called. Now whether or not Charlemagne was party to that, there's debate on that. It's irrelevant, totally irrelevant, because now, even though Charlemagne is the most powerful man in that century or that time, somebody else put a crown on his head.
Right.
And you know the implication there? If he can put the crown on your head, he can also take it off your head. Do you know what? A little later on, at 1215, the Pope deposed Frederick. He took his crown away from him. Now you tell me how much power the Pope has had and still has over the crowned heads of Europe, and I'll tell you, it's been almost absolute power. Even though there have been pockets of problems, they've had to get things straightened up and come back and do things a different way, but they've done it. All right, so we now have the Holy Roman Empire. you know what I said? The Pope called him Caesar Augustus, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Did you ever hear of Adolf Hitler's Third Reich? Do you know what Reich means in German? Empire. Did you ever ask the question, where was the Second Reich? And even more astounding than that, where was the First Reich? Let me tell you where they were. The First Reich was the Holy Roman Empire of Charlemagne that lasted for a long time. The Second Reich ended with the Kaiser in 1918. And supposedly the Third Reich was going to be the 1,000-year rule of Nazi Germany. You know, people that studied history should have known that about everything, except for his wiping out the Jews, about everything that Hitler did, if you'd known history, you could have told what he was going to do before he did it. Did you ever wonder why Adolf Hitler had such an affinity with Italy? What naturally would bring Germany together with Italy, Mussolini? Now Italians, you know, they're not like Germans. They eat pasta and Germans eat vinegar, you know, and they don't. Germans are just hardy people that are on time, and Italians are laid back. There's no comparison to them. What is it that brought them together? I'll tell you what brought them together. Because Adolf Hitler knew that they had to be together. Because Charlemagne and the Pope and Charlemagne was the defender of the faith, and every other Frankish king was. Now, you know, later on the Franks developed into Germany, but even France today has a remnant of the Frankish Empire. What's French money called? Francs. Where'd that come from? The Frankish Empire. But by and large, mostly they're German. Now, when Adolf Hitler died, do you know what the Pope said about Adolf? The defender of the faith has fallen. So you say, well, how does this fit in with Baptist history? I'll tell you how it does. Because by this time, the Pope has a lock on just about everything in Europe. And therefore, all Baptists and all those who believe like Baptists, their lives are not worth a plug nickel.
That's right.
And millions of them were killed, were tortured, were persecuted. Well, I guess we need to move on a little bit. I think what I'll do, I'll take these doctrines, I'll mention those tomorrow. By this century, by 869, there turns out to be a split. Now that split didn't just start here. That split's been going on since Constantine. Constantine built that split in. But this is the split of the Greek Catholic Church and the Roman Catholic Church. The differences between them, well, I don't know, we get into this. Remember when Constantine moved the seat of the empire to Byzantium, which became Constantinople. After 476, when the Roman Empire allegedly ceased, how many of you have ever heard of the Byzantines or the Byzantines? Well, the Byzantines arose as the Roman Empire, only in the east, and all that Greek culture and that Eastern Orthodox culture evolved right there. And with the Byzantine empires all the time, I tell you what, you ever go to Tarpon Springs, Florida, when I held that meeting down there for Steve Shelton. We went up to Tarpon Springs, and that whole town is Greek. And they had several Greek Orthodox churches, and they've got all the rounded roofs and all the tiles and mosaics and all that. Those were called icons and all that stuff. But that's all a result of that old Byzantium, the old Byzantine Empire. But anyway, as we move on, we see religiously they split. The Greek Catholic Church, they still immerse. culture. But other than that, essentially their doctrine is just about the same. And then, of course, you have the Roman Catholic Church, which is the Pope. Now, the Greek Catholic Church does not recognize the Pope. Now, the Pope's a powerful man, and you may not believe this when I tell you this, but it is true, and that is that communism has been a development and a tool of Roman Catholicism in order to bring the Russian Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox Catholic Church back under the thumb of the Pope, and has done a pretty good job of it, of whipping the Russian and the Eastern Orthodox churches. All right. As we move on here, we've got to move on. In this century, the 10th century, about 1095, I believe it is, the Crusades start. 1095 was the first of the Crusades. Now, the Crusades changed the whole face of Europe with all of the activity and the travel and relocation of Europeans on into Palestine and into Turkey and all that, and just back and forth. But the Crusades were called by the popes because the Turks, the Muslims, had taken over Jerusalem, and the Pope is trying to get Jerusalem back. The Muslims built a holy place. They built a temple in Jerusalem, and there they had control, but they had to get it back. And so the Crusades were, if you study much about European history, you know that it really changed the face of Europe. But these Crusades, Pope Urban II, he called the first crusade at 1095, and Peter the Hermit is the one that led it. But here's what they did on these crusades. As a matter of fact, crusade comes from the word crux, which means cross. And that was the sign of the crusade. That was the alleged things, the alleged purpose of the crusades. The Pope would grant plenary indulgence. Plenary means complete. He told the Crusaders, I will forgive you, give you indulgence of all of the sins that you will commit until you get back here. In other words, it didn't matter what they did, they already had forgiveness for it ahead of time. And so you can imagine what developed from that, and the wild and the wicked things that developed from that. They emptied up prisons of Europe and sent prisoners. Bankrupt people were dismissed from their debts. About 600,000 men, women, and children went to Jerusalem, and they did capture Jerusalem temporarily until about 1099. Then they got beaten back. But there were many crusades. The 6th crusade was the Children's Crusade, when they let off children, and the children just got taken into captivity. There were 10, 11 crusades for the Holy Land. They even went and captured Constantinople, and I don't want to get too much into all that, but that's when they started taking places then. But the Crusades didn't cease, and they weren't limited to those things. About 1200 up here, about 1220, well, really probably 1208 to about 1249, but somewhere's in there, and it was a long time. There was a crusade called against the heretics of Europe. And specifically, the crusade was called against the Albigenses of southern France. And if you look where Gaul is, in the southern France, you see Lyons and Vienne, and then there. Though that is where the Albigenses were. As a matter of fact, there was a town called Albi, which is probably why they were called Albigenses. But I've already told you from the other night that they taught, the Albigenses taught, that Paul started their church, that founded their first church back there in his public ministry. So they'd been there for a long time, and not only we have that proof, remember I told you in 165 AD, there was a great persecution there at Lyons, France, and now because there were so many of these Albigenses, that the Pope called a whole crusade, and it lasted for 20 or 30 years. And they literally about obliterated the Albigenses from the face of the earth. and they believed exactly what we believe and teach. Now, you don't hear much about this. I've got a book, I didn't bring it out here with me. It is about the characters of the Inquisition. Now, the Inquisition starts about the same time, or officially. It actually started probably about 1184, but somewhere in here, and officially it's at 1231. It had been going on for years. You know what Inquisition is? It is to inquire. And so the Inquisition takes place, but you know, the Catholic Church, how they justify the Inquisition. You ought to read this. I've got the introduction to this book written by a Catholic priest. And he says that we have to look at this thing a different way. He said it's not so much on the people that will happen, it's what was the land was delivered and saved from. The heresies of these heretics. Well, what were our heresies? We didn't believe in the Pope, we didn't believe in the Mass, we didn't believe in infant baptism and all that. But they actually want you to feel sorry for them because they work so hard killing Baptists. And they actually can just pass this off, and then one statement there said, well, everybody makes mistakes. And they murdered millions, tortured and murdered millions. But anyway, there was even a crusade all the way up here in the 1400s against the Hussites, John Huss. Followers of those, and many more resulted in massacres of millions. And the papacy grew rich and powerful from all of these crusades because the riches that they captured, that they stole, went to the coffers of Rome. The Catholic orders were developed. The Benedictine monks from 529 in France, the Cistercians, the Carmelites, the Augustinians, the Dominicans, the Franciscans, the Jesuits, all of these different Catholic orders. But folks, the Dominicans and the Franciscans, they were led by Dominic and St. Francis of Assisi. And that St. Francis of Assisi, there's even a song. And they talk about him being a lover of animals. And he was. He talked about Brother Worm and Brother Bird, Brother Earth and Brother Fire. I mean, a real cuckoo bird. But you know what? He wasn't that innocent. Do you know what the Dominicans and the Franciscans did? They engineered the Inquisition. They are the ones who devised the tortures of the Inquisition. If you've ever seen the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum, and they've got replicas of some of the things that were used in the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition. But don't think for a minute that the Inquisition was limited to one time or to one country. It's simply the Spanish Inquisition is the one that we're most familiar with. But that, you see, that didn't take place. That was all the way up into the 1400s. The Inquisition started way back here. And then even before that, all the way back, the local priest had the authority to have an inquisition on a local level. But it was made and do you know to this day that the so-called Holy Office of Inquisition has never been repealed? Even to this day, it is still in. Now, I'm not saying that they're doing that. They could be somewhere. And I'm going to show you tomorrow night that they have done it in this century. Under that same holy office, they call it. But at any rate, the Inquisition is called, way on up here, there's a fellow by the name of Torquemada, who was the head honcho of the Spanish Inquisition in the 1400s. Matter of fact, about 1483. He was appointed the head inquisitor of the Spanish Inquisition. Do you know who appointed him? Ferdinand and Isabella, the same ones that sent out Chris. The exact same ones who had appointed Torquemada to be the inquisitor. Well, they were the engineers of the Inquisition. Later on, after the Reformation took place, or it began here in about 1512, really began, the Council of Trent was called, and the result of all of that, there was a fellow by the name of Ignatius of Loyola. that really wasn't his real name, but he called himself Ignatius. There was a true saint of God named Ignatius that lived way back here, and that's where he got that name. He stole that name from him, but he called himself Ignatius of Loyola. And he is the one that devised the Jesuits. He became the founder of the Jesuit order, the Society of Jesus. And do you know what their expertise was? It was chasing down heretics. And so, in essence, they were kind of like the KGB and the CIA rolled into one, and the British Secret Service. And do you know what their pledge was to the Pope? That for the greater glory of God, they would obey the Pope regardless of what he commanded them to do. And that's still the order that they take. But you hear them as the Society of Jesus. You have the Franciscans. You have the little fat monk with the bald head and hands folded and the birds flying around him. Very innocent. But these folks are not innocent at all. These folks are guilty of sin as they can possibly be. I don't know. Time's about up. There's so much to do, so much to say. We'll talk about these doctrines tomorrow. But do you see the world picture that we've got? How the things have developed. And do you see from Nimrod, we've had a constant succession of paganism, and it has never died, and that joining of church and state, and it has always developed in the destruction of our brethren. Let's all stand. Got questions or comments? I'd certainly welcome them. Please let me have it. Mother Harvey, would you dismiss?